When I stepped into the saddle of national leadership, I was not under any illusion that there would be incumbency challenges. From my experience in participating in changes of government over the years, I knew a few realities about power incumbency. I knew, for instance, that any government, especially a military one, needed to keep its ears to the ground to monitor the widespread feelings. In addition, there was a constant need to feel the pulse of the officer corps of the armed forces. It was also essential to understand the previous power interests and formations within the country and see their linkages with interests in the armed forces. Most importantly, although military governments come into being by supplanting an existing political administration, the dethroned politicians remain a group of interest when considering the stability of power in the hands of the military. From my experience, hardly any military coup takes place without knowing the inspiration of political interests. Both civilian governments and intending military leaders always have their ears on the ground of public opinion to sense where the wind is blowing. The atmosphere of public dissatisfaction creates the environment for a change of governments. That is the object lesson of Nigeria's encounters with military administration and coup from 1966 to the final exit of the military from power in 1999. Therefore, from the inception of our administration in 1985, I had general anticipation that there would be challenges from various segments of the populace, such as the military, labor unions, radical student unionism, big business interests, etc. My approach was to rally the nation around vital national policies and programs. We needed concrete roadmaps around reforming the national economy, reorienting society towards desirable values, promoting self-reliance to boost the economy, and promoting a fairer and more equitable federation. Above all, we needed to implement a credible and workable political transition program. I was under no illusion that even our best effort could eliminate disquiet in the polity, nor did I deceive myself into thinking that political interests would not exploit our frailties to try and discredit and destabilize the administration. But as in most things in life, our troubles came from sometimes unexpected directions and from events that were sometimes totally unrelated. I wish to recall only a few of the events that shook the administration to its foundations under our watch to highlight the inevitable fact that every administration experiences some challenges in leadership. What matters, however, is the ability to surmount and handle these challenges, restabilize the ship of state, and proceed with the task of governance and nation building. The death of Dele Giwa. On October 19, 1986, the charismatic and famous journalist Dele Giwa was killed by a parcel bomb that was delivered to his Ikeja home by yet unidentified couriers. Reports from initial eyewitnesses, the police and preliminary intelligence analysis on what happened were shocking and confusing. His security guards handed the parcel to Mr. Giwa's son for onward transmission to his father. Dele Giwa was at his breakfast table with Mr. Kayode Soyinka, the London bureau chief of Newswatch magazine. The parcel reportedly exploded on being opened and blew the lower torso of Mr. Giwa to pieces. Dele would later die from his wounds in a hospital. The novelty and tragic impact of the incident badly shook the nation. I was equally shocked by it all. On a personal level, I had just lost a friend. Mr. Giwa was a good friend, like a few other senior journalists in the country. We spoke often on the phone and met a few times. I valued his deep insight on national issues and respected his views and reached as a media leader. My sense of loss was, however, overwhelmed by the public outcry and the feeling of tragedy in the introduction of an entire novel mode of killing in our country. Coming a few weeks after the IOC crisis, which led to the retirement of my number 2 Commodore Ebitu Ukiwe, I saw Giwa's wicked and cruel murder as part of a series of booby traps and acts of destabilization being hatched against the administration. Undoubtedly, our choice of the path of rigorous reform had earned us unintended adversaries. I tried to understand the implications of what had just happened by making sense of it all. I analyzed and tried to interpret the incident first at a personal level. Whoever was the mastermind knew my relationship with Giwa and a few senior journalists. Hitting at Giwa would get to me emotionally. Secondly, Giwa was a very popular and colorful journalist, a person of great public interest for anyone wanting to inflict a mischievous political blow on the young military administration. Giwa was loved by his audience and the rest of the public. Targeting him would shock the public and paint the administration in a feeble light. The insinuation that the parcel may have come from the headquarters of the administration was cheap and foolish. Why would an officially planned high-level assassination carry an apparent forwarding address of the killer? Why would a government-planned and executed crime point directly at the suspect? All this did not make sense to me. Much as this incident rattled me, I also accepted and understood it to be part of the challenges of the task I had taken on. I was responsible for acting in the public interest, but only in the context of the institutions and mechanisms of government. I had no alternative but to resort to the state's investigative apparatus. The police and the intelligence services were all I had to rely on. I promptly ordered the Inspector General of Police to assign the best possible investigative team to the case and report to me daily. I also instructed the State Security Service and Military Intelligence to recall all recent encounters with Mr. Giwa and other senior journalists and submit a detailed report to me promptly. A Newswatch management took recourse in the law by taking the murder case to court through their lawyer, Chief Gani Fawemi. However, the Newswatch team's recourse to play to the gallery of public sentiment did not help the case. Directing public focus to only one suspect, namely the administration, may have hurt the path of a fruitful investigation. In any credible crime investigation, you limit the chances of success by limiting the circle of suspicion to only one direction. Worse still, when a crime is committed, to ascribe an exclusive political motive to what should first be a criminal act never helps. It helps the real criminals escape the political smoke and cloud. The involvement of high-profile lawyer Gani Fawemi and the populist slant given to the case by the media poisoned the investigation with political overtones. The investigation into the Giwa murder became part of the tools in the armor of a growing political opposition targeted at discrediting the military over the planned political transition program and human rights issues. The legal drama and political grandstanding combined to muddle the work of the police and intelligence investigators towards getting a factual report on this cruel and criminal act. What the campaigners failed to realize was that even under a military regime, crimes will be committed by persons and agencies that may not be directly related to either the military establishment or the government. The best way to cover up for their heinous crimes would be to craft them in a manner that includes the government among the suspects so that what should ordinarily be a criminal investigation is drowned by political actions and populist sentiments. Despite this initial unfortunate distraction, I chose to keep an open mind and encourage the police and other investigative agencies to do their best to unravel the murder, given the enormity of the public interest in the matter. While the accused military officers resorted to legal action to protect themselves and their careers, the police team went ahead with its investigation. The Supreme Court's suggestion that the Newswatch lawyer, Chief Gani Fawemi, could take on the case as a private prosecutor did not receive a positive response. The hysteria of the media did not help the investigation of the Giwa murder. As is typical of the Nigerian media, the direction was marked by an adversarial attitude towards the government, which has remained the hallmark of the Nigerian media from its colonial heydays. It was an attitude of we versus the government that has remained today. It is a situation in which the government is adjudged guilty even before the evidence in a case is adduced. When the Obasanjo civilian administration reopened the Giwa case at the Oputa panel on human and civil rights, I expected that the police and lawyers would come forward with new evidence as to their findings on the Giwa murder over the years. Nothing of such happened. The Giwa, like all mysterious murders, had remained unsolved after so many years. I keep hoping the truth will be uncovered in our lifetime or after us. More often than not, mysterious crimes are solved long after their commission. The Vatsa coup. What has come to be known as the Vatsa coup occurred within the first few months of the administration. It began life first as a series of rumors. I heard through multiple sources that my childhood friend and longtime colleague, General Gideon Vatsa, was planning to topple our young administration in a coup. At first, I dismissed it as the handiwork of people who were envious of the cordial relationship between Vatsa and me over the years. I knew, for instance, that many intermediate and senior officers were unhappy that I appointed General Vatsa as Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, even though he was not part of the change of government that ousted General Buhari. Yet, I remained true to our friendship and bent backwards to accommodate his excesses and boisterousness. Among some of our colleagues and the public, Vatsa became known as the Emperor of Abuja because of his robust boisterousness and love of drama. I admired his passion for poetry and fraternity with the Association of Nigerian Authors. Rumors about the impending coup reached me through military intelligence and some officers close to Vatsa. Many were cautionary advice, "Sir, be careful with your friend," as many informants did not want to be quoted or to come between us as friends. I dismissed them at first as mere rumors. Ours is a society in which the power of rumor can overwhelm the reality of facts. Because rumors about happenings in high places tend to be attractive to a mass audience, they tend to gain ground quickly and acquire a life of their own. Unless confronted with the power of facts based on thorough investigation, these rumors repeated and passed around the country tend to become alternative facts. They could have a destructive effect on public sensitivity and perceptions. With our experience in the few months in government and the benefit of hindsight based on previous rumors, I determined that the best way to tackle the rumors about a possible Vatsa coup was by confronting the principal suspects. Therefore, when the decibel of the stories rose too high, I confronted Vatsa himself after reporting the rumors to more senior colleagues like General Nasco, Garba Duba, and Wushishi. Nasco intervened and tried to find out the truth from Vatsa. Vatsa flatly denied it all, but the covert investigations by the military and other intelligence services continued. Once substantial, incontrovertible evidence was established, the arrests began. It turned out that Vatsa had paid several officers money to facilitate the coup operation. One of them was Lieutenant Colonel Musa Bitiyong, who was given 50,000 naira. He admitted it, and Vatsa also admitted the payment but said he wanted to help Bitiyong establish a farm project. The case of Lieutenant Colonel Musa was not helped because he had previously been involved in other controversial coup stories. When the coup was first uncovered, I did not quite believe the extent of Vatsa's involvement. Even worse were the details of the dastardly plans, including plans to bomb the Echo Bridge in Lagos and possibly hijack the presidential jet to eliminate the president. As the details kept coming in, it became harder not to believe the integrity of the disclosures. I felt a deep personal sense of betrayal. There were details of conversations, funding, travel itinerary, and recruitment of troops to support the operation. Each time I had to be briefed on aspects of the coup plot, I insisted on having a senior officer with integrity present as a witness. I invited Garba Duba to listen in on one occasion as the investigating team briefed me. When I shrugged in disbelief, the briefing officer then revealed that Vatsa had even tried to escape through the wall air conditioner hole in his detention room but was stopped by vigilant guards. I had reason to be shocked at Vatsa's role, but I was not surprised. We were very close friends. We had grown up together in Mina and had been classmates in Bida. We did several things together as peers. My wife recalled that we used to share a room as bachelors. We would reach out for whatever shirt was available, irrespective of whose it was, and just wear it and head out. We were that close. With the benefit of hindsight now, I recall that a constant part of our relationship as teenagers and young men was a continuous and recurrent peer jealousy on his part towards me. He was always envious of my achievements, especially when he thought I was progressing better than him, either in school or our military career path. For instance, when I became head boy at Bida Secondary School, Vatsa often made it a duty to put obstacles in my way as a leader. He frequently disregarded my instructions, insisting that there was nothing so special about being the head boy. That trend continued through our military career, but tended to diminish as we both progressed in our respective military careers. Still, he was envious of my career path and postings up to when I was chosen as member of the Supreme Military Council under General Murtala Mohammed. The investigations revealed the sordid details of the coup plan. There was a plan, for instance, to bomb strategic bridges in Lagos to cut off the mainland from the island and obstruct troop reinforcement from the Ikeja cantonment to Bonny Camp on the island. There were also plans to sabotage the air assets of the Air Force using the Makurdi Air Base. Other aspects included a plan to hijack or shoot down the president's aircraft using Air Force combat aircraft. The multi-dimensional nature of the plan accounts for the heavy involvement of officers from the Air Force in the plans. Once the investigations were concluded and the panel reached its verdict, it was clear that the coup planners had to be executed. An allowance was made for appeals to the tribunal. Accordingly, those with only tangential involvement had their sentences commuted to life or other jail terms. There was no room to commute the sentences for Vatsa and the other core planners. Being intermediate and senior military officers, they were fully aware of the consequences of planning a coup and failing. That is one of the most elementary lessons every military officer knows by heart. Vatsa and his 9 other co-conspirators were executed in March 1986. They had planned a bloody coup which would have plunged the country into darkness. I had to choose between saving a friend's life and the nation's future. Above all, everyone who had signed on to a military career understood clearly what it meant to plan a coup and fail. The penalty was clear and unmistakable. Of course, Vatsa's death was a personal loss of a childhood friend. As a human being, I was somewhat depressed to watch him die in such circumstances. However, the nation's stability and the cohesion of the armed forces were too high on the scale of priorities to be sacrificed for personal considerations. The law and the imperatives of order and the national security are overriding. Given my closeness to General Vatsa and the political interpretations that emerged about his coup plot after his trial and execution, it is not surprising that agents of subsequent political dispensations tried to weaponize the Vatsa coup as a political tool against us in the post-1999 political ploys. Unfortunately, some members of the Vatsa family lent their voices and presence to these ploys, which fizzled out in due course. The Gideon Orkar coup. By April 22, 1990, yet another military coup took place in the history of our administration. I must confess that what became known as the Orkar coup hit me as a rude surprise. As was my usual daily routine, I saw off the last set of visitors to my Dodan Barrack residence after 1 a.m. Ahead of retiring to bed, I flipped through the various channels on the television to catch up on the late news. I retired to bed without finding anything to arrest and keep my interest. The family was innocently asleep. My wife, who had gone to use the bathroom, rushed back to me to report that she had noticed some unusual movements on the premises outside. The troop movements and formations she had noticed were unusual in the security protocol of the residential part of Dodan Barracks. I stood up to have a look. I noticed, as she had done, that troops that may not be part of the guard details of the residence were taking up strategic positions. I alerted my guards, who had already seen what was going on. Very shortly afterwards, small arms firing commenced. It targeted the residence and office quarters as window panes began to shatter. This was followed by heavy artillery bombardments of the residential quarters. From that point, my ADC, Lieutenant Colonel UK Bello, took charge. He had not been taken by surprise. Soon afterwards, the coup plotters were all over the place. They tried to invade the residence, but were delayed and repelled by the guards formation of soldiers and state security officers. I had some of the best. My guards did what they were trained to do best, to protect me and my family as their primary subjects. They recognized that my safety and those of my immediate family were of topmost priority. Even against my stubborn insistence that I was not leaving my residence for any reason, the boys succeeded in extracting me and my family in separate units to safe houses far from our residence, which had now been reduced to virtual rubble. Lieutenant Colonel UK Bello and the boys moved to engage the disloyal soldiers. In the process of moving to deploy the military tank located near the residence, UK Bello discovered that the rebel soldiers had earlier sabotaged the vehicle and it could not be used to return the fire of the coup plotters. Loyal troops nonetheless engaged the coup makers, while military communication and signals rallied loyal forces. The critical command was put on alert. General Sani Abacha took control of the loyal forces as necessary and constantly communicated progress in the operation to foil the coup to me in my safe location. We had foiled the coup and were in the process of neutralizing the disloyal troops and their allies. While the treasonable broadcast of the coup plotters was running on FRCN, the military operation to counter the coup and neutralize the plot was in full force. By late morning on 22nd April, the coup had been successfully foiled. The treasonous broadcast on the radio was replaced by sustained martial music. The disloyal troops were on the run in different locations, first around Lagos and later other adjoining locations, mostly in and around Lagos. Different military formations around the country pledged their continuing loyalty and allegiance to the federal military government under my leadership. Arrests were being made as instant investigations were taking place and the rebels were being rounded up and arrested. By the late afternoon, we addressed the nation, reassuring all of the president's safety and the liquidation of the coup attempts. I was saddened by the revelation of some of the coup ringleaders. I had known many of them personally and helped them in their careers and personal affairs. Orkar had frequently visited from his base at Shaki in Oyo State. I had on occasion instructed General Maman Kontagora, then Minister of Works, to help him fix a precarious bridge under his base and repair the road leading there. Colonel Niam was a regular communicator with Dodam Barracks, and he used to write in with his suggestions on national issues which were duly appreciated. As the investigation proceeded, I could not help but reflect on the content of the coup plotters' broadcasts. The laughable idea of the sacking 5 states of the Federation, the attempt to meddle in the Sokoto Sultanate, and the ridiculous accusations against the AFRC and myself. Happily, the informed populace condemned these laughable and adolescent accusations and proposals. The trials and investigations were concluded and the culprits were punished for their high treason and crimes against the Federal Republic of Nigeria. One aftermath of the Orkar coup attempts was reinforcing Nigeria's confidence in the Federation's sovereignty and integrity. Even if the coup attempt was not as sloppy as it was, the public received very negatively the broadcast of certain states being expelled from the Federation. Even worse was the adolescent pronouncements of the coup planners, which sought to devalue our national leadership, reduce our politics to petty name-calling, and deliberately reduce and devalue our strength in diversity as a nation. Worse still, the coup plotters tried to bring our religious differences to the forefront of national discourse to further divide the nation along lines of faith. Consequently, the country emerged stronger, more cohesive, and integrated from this incident. The failure of the coup attempt was also the failure of divisive forces in both the military and the polity. Never again have we experienced further deployments of deliberate divisions to undermine the national interest. I would be the first to admit that even a tragic episode in national history can have some benefits. After dealing with the treasonable and professional indiscipline aspects of the unfortunate episode, we had to reflect on further reforms of the armed forces, especially the element of communication within the rank and file to improve their understanding of government policies and activities. It dawned on us that a good deal of the misconception that informed the Orkar coup speech may have arisen from inadequate communication among members of the armed forces about the policies and programs of the military government. In addition, we carried out further overhauls of the government structure and machinery to make it more relevant to the transition to civil rule. The vice president became a civilian after the incumbent retired after years of meritorious service as a naval officer. The vice president initiated a monthly media briefing to narrow the communication and information gap between the public and the administration. The OIC Palaver. As I said earlier, in January 1986, we walked into an unnecessary controversy with broad political consequences. Nigeria was widely reported in the local and international press as having become the 46th member of the Organization of Islamic Conference, OIC. The response of the Nigerian public to this news was instant and incendiary. Christians were livid. Muslims saw no reason for the anxiety over Nigeria's purported membership of the harmless body. To the best of my knowledge, we only sent an observer delegation to the conference to revere the pioneering role of some of our founding fathers like Sir Ahmadu Bello in founding the body. I do not recall giving a mandate for the organization's full membership to the observer team that went to the conference, but the response from our home audience nearly set the nation ablaze. Even key regime officials of both faiths were credited with wild and hardly responsible comments. Some senior government officials were caught in the ugly crossfire. Alienated politicians feasted on the ensuing confusion and deepened the national mood of division and confusion. Unfortunately, the lethal rumor traffic cost some very senior administration officials their high positions. The government could not sit idly by as mischief makers eroded national unity and interfaith understanding. The controversy over the OIC matter was hardly understandable for me, but it taught me about the sensitivity of religion in our polity. Subsequently, it guided the government in balancing participation in government affairs between the two dominant faiths. It even led to our establishing an interfaith agency of representatives of both religions to enhance mutual trust and understanding. That ensured we never again witness any other major national misunderstanding based on faith. During the political transition program, we ensured that the Political Bureau, the Constituent Assembly, and the Constitution Drafting Committee remain even-handed and balanced in religious matters. This was the most effective way of underlining the fundamental secularity of the Nigerian Federation to date. The 1989 SAP riots. By the end of 1988, the administration and the nation grappled with the economic adjustment shock effects. We had chosen not to further enslave the nation by accepting a loan facility from the IMF. It was clear to us in the administration that difficult days lay ahead. Cost of living on goods and services jumped as our economy was heavily dependent on imports and we were short of foreign exchange. The campaign to encourage increased self-reliance and fall back on homegrown goods and services did not sink home initially. What preoccupied the public discourse was a regime of suffering and denials. Our natural resource was to take another look at the pricing of petroleum products. We concluded that we needed to adjust petroleum product prices upwards to first discourage their massive smuggling across the borders to neighboring countries where prices were less competitive, thus making smuggling from Nigeria more attractive. We also needed to raise our revenue profile since petroleum products were our immediate fallback. We needed to carry the public along, but securing a consensus on this subject was politically sensitive. We already had a politically charged atmosphere. The economic hardship created a tense atmosphere that different political groups exploited to undermine the military administration. Political and opinion leaders opposed SAP, but no one advanced an alternative policy framework. We were determined to save the economy. Self-reliance and a homegrown economic alternative were our way forward, but nothing could dissuade our opponents. We knew several meetings were being held between discredited politicians and labor leaders. Labor leaders, in turn, were reaching out to radical academic unions and student union organizations to galvanize support for nationwide protests and riots. The immediate spark that led to the riots was a piece of baseless propaganda. It was circulated through the rumor mill that a publication had just appeared in the influential African-American magazine Ebony. According to the purveyors of the propaganda, The magazine carried a story that vital military leaders in Nigeria had stashed away millions of dollars of stolen public funds in a number of foreign bank accounts. The authors of the story and ringleaders of the post-protest movement mass-produced posters and handbills with summaries of the said ebony story. They distributed them in various urban centers and university campuses. The streets of Lagos, Kano, and Abuja were flooded with these fake handbills. The political protests convinced the respected Dr. Tai Solarin to address a press conference condemning the alleged massive corruption. With Tai Solarin's implicit endorsement of the ebony story, the unsuspecting public believed the falsehood. Spontaneously, protests and riots erupted all over the country. Against the backdrop of growing hardship and difficult living conditions, people were made to believe that the economic difficulties resulted from massive corruption by the military leadership. Urban centers, university campuses, and public squares erupted in uncontrolled rioting and protests. Public property was massively destroyed. The police was overwhelmed, but we were restrained in the use of the military to quell the riots. A few arrests of the vital ringleaders were made and charges were brought using existing decrees. However, it turned out that there was no such publication in either Ebony magazine or any other known publication anywhere in the world. The promoters of the rumor had achieved their aim of setting off confusion in the polity, even at the expense of their individual and collective shame and public disgrace. After almost 2 weeks of mayhem, the riots and protests were quelled and brought under control. However, we continued. We recognized the need to tweak the adjustment program to give it a more human face. Subsequently, we introduced palliative measures and institutions. These included establishing a People's Bank, community banks, the National Economic Reconstruction Fund, NER Fund, and the Mass Transit Program. A comprehensive social and poverty alleviation program was institutionalized as a response to the grievances and the protests that arose from the introduction of SAP. I regard some of these measures and institutions as the dividends of the adjustment process. Some of these programs have survived, have been adopted, and sometimes rechristened by successive administrations. The C-130 air crash. On September 26, 1992, a Nigerian Air Force Lockheed C-130 H-transporter aircraft with manufacturer number 4624 crashed into the swamps of the Lagos coast barely 3 minutes after taking off from the Ikeja airport. A total of 159 souls on board were lost, including the crew and 9 foreigners. The aircraft was transporting passengers, primarily officers of the various armed services, from Lagos to Abuja. These were mostly middle-level military officers whose transportation to Abuja had been consolidated to save costs. A subsequent accident investigation revealed that the aircraft lost 3 of its 4 engines when lifted off with heavy load. More importantly, the investigation by both the aircraft manufacturers and the Nigerian Air Force established that 2 significant factors caused the accident. First was poor maintenance. The Air Force had in its inventory a number of these C-130 aircrafts as the heart of its airlift capability. Most were consolidated and parked at the Ikeja Air Force hangar adjacent to the airport's presidential wing. As a result of age, some aircraft needed maintenance. As a result of economic difficulties, some cargo aircraft were cannibalized for spares to keep a few of them operational. Among the few operational ones, most were due for routine scheduled maintenance, which had not occurred for some time. The ill-fated aircraft was one of the few that were still serviceable. The 3 engines failed soon after takeoff as a result of both fatigue and excessive load. Given the sheer number of military officers who lost their lives in the crash and the mid-level rank of most of them, Nigeria had failed in one fell swoop a sizable number of a generation of officers in this accident. Mischief makers and rumor mongers were coloring the public perception of this accident. Some speculated that regime opponents in the armed forces had sabotaged the aircraft to vent their anger at the direction of the administration. A more wicked version of the rumor was that the administration had somehow plotted to assemble these officers in one consignment for elimination for fear that they might be planning a coup against the military administration's leadership based on the failed Gideon Orkar coup that had taken place earlier. It was not until after the accident investigation team disclosed the report that it was established that the aircraft had crashed purely due to technical faults and oversights by those responsible for ensuring that the fleet was airworthy before embarking on such a trip with so many souls on board. It was, however, an indication of the level of decay to which our public perception and discourse had descended that any group of citizens would blame such a tragic accident on an administration that had invested so much resources in the training and welfare of the officers and men of the armed forces over the years. As we approached the end of the administration's tenure, nothing could be put beyond the propaganda armory of the desperate political elite and their followers. We took the rumors in our stride and looked more to the welfare and entitlements of the deceased officers while taking measures to ensure that such an accident never occurred again in the history of the country and the Air Force in particular.